Okay, so I wanted to do a live because I just want to talk about Ride for Raylan for a little bit and just share kind of what that means. So a lot of you know on Facebook that Raylan is special needs. He has a rare genetic mutation called Syngap 1, and someone brought up to me the other day that they didn't really quite understand what Syngap 1 is, and so I thought that I would kind of talk about that today. When Raylan started having seizures and his epilepsy got out of control is what, I don't know how else to describe it. He started having seizures that were just every day, all day, like hundreds of seizures between myoclonic seizures and absence seizures. And so I took him to a neurologist. And this neurologist was actually at Rocky Mountain Children's Hospital, which is in Denver. So we took him here and they put him on Keppra right after his first EEG. And then Keppra actually made it 10 times worse. He started having more atonic seizures, more drop seizures, and they were just, it was actually really terrifying to watch. So he'd have bloody noses, he had concussions. One time he busted his ears so bad that it was like just swollen and purple. And at the time he really just learned how to walk. So like, it wasn't that great. So he had what they called myoclonic seizures or atonic seizures, and absence seizures. And so I called the doctor and I was like, hey, this is what's happening with this medication. And he's like, okay, let's wean him off that medication and put him on another medication. And they just kept his seizures would get worse, and they kept changing his medicine over the phone, and they wouldn't come see him. So finally I called his primary care and I was like, this is ridiculous. This has been months of there's something causing these seizures that's not able to be controlled with medication. For some reason, these seizures are not able to be controlled with medicine. So called his primary care, and then I said, can we get a second opinion? Can we get a second opinion from a neurologist? They said, okay, let's do it. They referred him to Children's Hospital in Denver. That neurologist kind of thought I was crazy. And Denver Children's is a great hospital, don't get me wrong. So they thought I was kind of crazy in the aspect of thinking that Raylan was having these falling seizures, or he was losing control of all his muscles at the same time. And they seriously thought I was crazy. And when I was saying he was having upwards of 100 of them a day, and even more than 100, they thought I was even more crazy. But they're like, okay, we'll do an EEG. So they did an overnight EEG, and they saw this EEG showed seizure activity, and even when he wasn't having seizures, he had what they called a noisy background. So his background was extremely noisy, looked like seizures, but weren't quite seizures. There was nothing organized about it. So then the neurologist thought I was crazy. He was like, okay, you're not crazy. I think he needs to be referred to a genetic epileptologist, and I think we need to do a genetic epilepsy panel on him. So they did an MVT genetic epilepsy panel. That panel shows a bunch of mutations that they test for mutations that could be associated with epilepsy. So it came back. Raylan was diagnosed with Syngap 1 genetic mutation. At the time, they told me that Raylan was number 500 internationally that had been diagnosed with epilepsy. And they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know, they didn't know what it meant. They knew that he had Syngap 1. And Syngap 1 was just that, it was just a name. So I started like kind of researching and getting into it and trying to understand kind of what exactly it meant. And it was a lot. Some people were like, oh, it's just a mutation that's associated with autism. It's just a mutation that we don't have the answers to. It can have all these other things that go with it. Epilepsy is the main thing. So like nobody could give me solid answers. And so I started, hooking up with other parents and stuff that had kiddos with Syngap 1. And I started comparing like how their kiddo does with my kiddo, like compared to like my kiddo and like what the range is, right? So I started looking at other parents and I'm like, all of them struggle with hypotonia. Like, what is that? So we've always called Raylan like a noodly or a floppy baby. Doesn't mean he's not strong, because trust me, if he doesn't want an IV, you're not giving it to him. If he doesn't want something, it ain't happening. He's strong, but he has no muscle tone. So he just kind of is floppy. Like he's like a noodle. And sometimes he walks like all disorganized and it doesn't make sense. Well, when you're having seizures and you're trying to walk, your brain's all scattered and it doesn't make sense. So Raylan's been in therapy probably since he was 9 months old, because I noticed he wasn't hitting milestones. If I hadn't put him in therapy at 9 months old, I don't know where he'd be. Because even if I didn't have a diagnosis for him, there was something missing. So he's in therapy. He wasn't rolling over. He wasn't crawling. He wasn't doing nothing. So we put him in therapy. And if we didn't do that, I don't know where he'd be. Raylan also is nonverbal. He does not talk. He has no sounds. And what I mean by no sounds is like, so most babies babble and they have like sounds or like vowel sounds or goos and gaws. Raylan doesn't have that. Raylan doesn't babble. He's never, been able to form a sound with his mouth other than a laugh and a cry. So fast forward, Raylan is now 7. He is in 1st grade and he's really good at math. He understands his shapes, he understands his colors and everything, but like, if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it because he doesn't talk. So, another thing Raylan struggles with is like his eating. So he doesn't chew with the front teeth. He doesn't chew with his back teeth. He doesn't move food back. He only chews with his front teeth. And then he kind of just like shovels stuff in his mouth because he doesn't understand like how the chewing breaks down the food. He thinks like, I think that maybe he thinks that if he just shoves the food in his mouth, it will gradually break down. So that's kind of like one of the struggles that he has is eating. He's 7 years old and he maybe weighs 47 pounds. He's tall. Sometimes he goes like on food strikes, I want to say. Like he eats and he has things that he really likes, but I feel like he goes on food strike. So that means like he'll skip several meals because he just doesn't want to eat. And you try like to give him everything he likes, but if he doesn't want to eat, he doesn't want to eat. And sometimes that's associated with constipation. He has severe constipation, and not because he's not getting enough fiber or it's not soft enough, but there's another struggle with hypotonia. So hypotonia is it's hard to explain, but basically your muscles have they're not toned or developed, or they don't do what they're supposed to do. So I don't really know how to explain it, because most people kind of coincide tone and strength, but they're two different things. I've seen some people with not good muscle tone, but they're pretty strong. So Raylan's like that. Well, your stomach and your GI tract is also a muscle, and he has what they call low motility. What does that mean? It means that his squishers, or the muscles that push the bowel, down through the bowel movements, they move them down through your GI tract, they don't work. So, if you can imagine, we're trying to squish all this junk to go down. It's like when you shove junk into a garbage disposal and it's not turned on, and it just fills to the top, right? It doesn't, because the other stuff isn't churning underneath it. So Raylan's squishers don't work. So then he has all this buildup in his belly, and then he gets constipated. Well, then he goes on food strikes because he's constipated. Well, he doesn't talk. So then you have to okay, what's going on? Why are we not eating? So we have to feel his belly, see if there's poop in his belly. We have to, check his throat, see if his throat hurts. Ask him if his head hurts, because he is able to tell you if his head hurts. And sometimes he just doesn't want to eat. So that's another struggle, is low motility in his bowels. And all of this comes from hypotonia, from not having muscle tone, at least with Raylan and things that I've seen. Every Syngap kid is similar, but they're different. So what one Syngap kid may struggle with, another one may not struggle with. It's a spectrum of, different kiddos. Things work for different kiddos in different ways. And our kiddos, because they don't have, so Syngap is a protein that's in your brain, and you need a certain amount of it for it to function correctly. And our kids are only operating at 50%, so they don't have all that protein that they need. And I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell you all that stuff behind that. I just can tell you what Raylan struggles with every day. I can tell you what his victories are, and what his not so good days, and his sleep patterns, and things that he struggles with, and why research is so important for Syngap. It's so important for Syngap. But in order to do research, you have to get funds. And in order to get funds, we have to do fundraisers. So last year we did an FDA meeting, and there was a bunch of parents that kind of spoke about their kiddo and their struggles and things like that. And this was actually probably about a week prior to his brain surgery. So we did all these parents talking to the FDA, and it was this whole big thing, huge meeting, right? We finally got a medical code for Syngap. So our providers can now put it in his chart. This is what his diagnosis is. So he finally has a code. Whew, this is getting hard. And that was a really big win. Well, now we have people who want to look in and try to do development on medications and things, or drugs or things like that for Syngap. And like I said, I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand all that. I just know that it's a really big win for Syngap. And it's something that we should all be excited for. But I do know that in order to find out more about what's going on with Syngap, we're going to have to raise funds. But we also need to raise awareness, right? So Syngap isn't something that you can walk up and be like, that kid has Syngap. Like there's testing and things, like you're not able to just notice a kid has Syngap right away. They look like a typical kid. They just function differently. Like if you were to put my 5-year-old and Raylan next to each other, you couldn't tell the difference between Raylan being neurotypical and Wyatt not, or Raylan not being neurotypical and Wyatt being neurotypical, until you see them function. Once you see them function, then you're like, oh, there's something different. So, it's getting real hard. So, going forward, I am doing Ride for Raylan. So I have a ride in March. It is 100 miles mountain bike in Utah. And I'm using that to raise funds for Syngap. So we can do more research. So we can get the therapies our kiddos need. So we can raise awareness. Awareness is so important because if you don't know, you don't know, right? So I have a lot of friends that have never actually met Raylan. I have friends that I went to school with, but they've never actually met Raylan because they were friends with me before I had Raylan and before I moved away. I have friends or people I've met in town that have added me on Facebook, but they don't know Raylan because I know them on a professional level. So clients and things like that, like from the gym, people that I've worked with, they've never actually met Raylan. All they see is me posting, his struggles and things like that. But do they understand what Syngap is? No. So when I started doing Ride for Raylan, I started realizing that I can tell you guys Raylan has Syngap, but if I don't explain it, you guys have to Google. And if you ever try to Google something that there's not a lot of information about, it's like you Google it, there's not a lot of information, but there's also a lot of crap ton of information, but none of it makes sense, right? So I think it's important for us, for me to share that, hold on. I think it's important for me to share what Syngap is, right? But I can't do that on a scientific level because I don't understand Syngap on a scientific level. I do understand my struggles with Raylan. I also understand that one day Raylan could be great and he could run and he could jump and he could play. And the next day, his body just completely betrays him. And he's not running and walking, he's in a wheelchair because his body is not functioning at a level that he needs. I do know that germs and stuff that would typically affect kiddos like Wyatt, barely, will take a huge toll on Raylan's body. His immune system is just not what it should be. So I do know that I can tell you what Raylan struggles with. I can tell you what Syngap is from my perspective. I don't know all the scientifics of it. But what I do know, also, I know a lot and I don't know a lot. I do know that we need to raise awareness. We need to raise funds for Syngap so that our children can have the studies they deserve. So our children can have the therapies that they deserve. So our kids are not in their 60s and their 30s just now getting diagnosed and having to live their whole life without a diagnosis, without the correct therapies, without the correct medication. I do know that in order for that to happen, in order for our children, for our doctors to understand that, okay, these are the signs and the symptoms of Syngap, we need to do a Syngap panel. When Raylan got his Syngap panel, it was just that. It wasn't just a Syngap panel, it was like all these rare mutations that kiddos that could be, you know, in line with epilepsy. It was an entire panel for epilepsy, right? So there was other things involved with it, but what if we raised enough awareness? What if we raised enough funds, enough awareness, so that when a doctor at Children's Hospital sees a child with the struggles that Raylan is having, they're like, okay, maybe it could be Syngap. You're telling me he has boom, 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 boom. Okay, well, boom, 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 boom requires us to test for Syngap. I don't know. If there's not awareness for that, if the doctors don't know to check for that, they don't know. So my hope and my goal with all of my rides, especially, you know, Leadville's coming up in August. I'm doing a ride in March. I don't know. I might do some rides in between. Who knows? You know, Sunrise to Sunset's coming up. The Belgian Waffle rides. And there's like lots of rides in between that are smaller that I could be using to raise funds and awareness for Syngap. When Raylan got diagnosed, I was like, okay, now how do I help him? And how do I help all these other kids with Syngap? How do I help them get through and move forward and get the therapies and the studies and the research that they need? How do I help them? And I didn't have a platform. I didn't know how I was supposed to help. I was like, okay, I'm a personal trainer, corrective exercise specialist. I know how it affects his body and his muscle tone. Maybe I could use that. But when it comes down to it, that's not enough. I can tell you how your body's supposed to function. I can tell you how to rehab a shoulder, but if the function was never there, I don't know how to help that. So I was like, okay, personal training is not necessarily my platform for it. And then I was like, okay, well, what else can I do? I don't know, maybe I go to school for physical therapy. I'm gonna go to school for physical therapy, and I'm gonna help Syngap kiddos because I'm a physical therapist. The problem with that is there is extensive stuff to get into a physical therapy program. And I'm not saying that I could never do it. I'm not saying that it's too hard. What I am saying is it's not it. It's not what it was, right? I tried, and every door that I tried to open just kept shutting. I couldn't find my GED, my actual GED transcript. My GPA for my exercise kinesiology was not super great. And the program for physical therapy is over 2 hours away. I'm a military spouse. My husband's home sometimes, he's not home sometimes. And that door I felt like it just slammed in my face. Like that's not what I was supposed to do. And it just slammed. And I was like, okay, well now what? And there are some in-between things there that I've tried, and the doors just kept slamming, and they kept slamming. And they just kept getting like closer, and it would shut right in front of me. And I couldn't figure out how I was supposed to help. Then, last year, and some of you know this, last year, I did Ride for Raylan for Denver Children's Hospital. And I wanted to make a team to raise funds for Children's Hospital because they've done so much for Raylan. Without Denver Children's, I don't think I'd ever know that Raylan has Syngap. Without Denver Children's, his GI tract would be messed up. Without Denver Children's, his developmental delays and his respiratory system has chronic atelectasis because it doesn't function. So all these things I would have never been able to do without Denver Children's. So I was like, okay, I am gonna ride for Denver Children's. And here's the funny thing. So Gay Woodhouse got me riding. I did Tour de Prairie road. And I'm not necessarily a road biker. I love bikes. It doesn't matter. I have like a lot of them. And they're all for different things. And I had a hybrid. And Gay was like, why don't you do Tour de Prairie? You can do 25, 50, 100 miles. It doesn't matter. You do as many miles as you want to do. And I was like, okay, let's do it. I bought a road bike the day before the tour. I took it to Rock on Wheels and I said, let's set it up and make sure that it's good to go. If it's good to go, I'll ride it tomorrow. I didn't even know how to shift on a road bike. So the road bike has the drop handlebars and you have to like shift with, I didn't really get it. I was like, all right, we're just gonna learn. We're gonna learn today. So I did just that. I learned, and I think I did 50 miles that day, if I remember right. And when I got home, I was like, whew, I'm sore, but I'm not as sore as I thought I was. So then I got home, and I saw it pop up in my news feed, Children's Courage Classic Tour, 78 miles. It was the following weekend, and I had to raise $500 to be able to do it. So I did. Ride for Raylan. I created a team, Ride for Raylan, and I did 78 miles on a road bike that I really had no idea how to ride. It rained, I kid you not. We went up, and it was fine. And then as soon as I started to descend, like Fremont Pass, as soon as I started to descend, it started raining and sleeting, and I was cold. I was wearing like this, and it was cold, and it was awful, and I hated it. Then I got to the next pass, and the rain was gone, and it was a straightaway for a while. And I was like, all right, let's go. I could have had the sag wagon like pick me up, but I was like, I picked my hip up. I remember I like physically picked my leg up and put it on my bike because I'm riding for Raylan, right? I'm riding for these kids at Children's Hospital, right? So I get on straight away, and this tandem bike passes me, and I'm like, that's cool. And it had a recumbent in the front, and then it had a regular road bike in the back. And he was young. He was like maybe in his 20s. So I see them at the next stop, and I was like, okay. I talked to them. I was like, it was his son who had been at Children's Hospital since he was a baby, and he couldn't necessarily ride an upright bike because his body doesn't allow him, but he could pedal. So I was like, oh, I gotta go. I gotta keep going. So I get back on the road, and I'm like, just keep going. And then I see this young kid pass me, and on the back it says, this is personal, this is for me. This kid was 19, had open heart surgery at like 16 or 17, and he was riding the whole 78 miles. This was his first time he was doing it, and he rode the whole 78 miles, clips and all. And I was like, that's it, this is where it's at. So I keep going. Then I meet another team, and this team is like, you know, they helped me finish out the ride. Like, I finished out the ride with them. It was a tandem, and I think their name was Team Courage, if I remember right. And I finished out the ride with them. I was by myself, and he was like, you know, if you ever want to ride again, call me up, and we'll ride together, and you can be on our team next year. And I was like, okay, cool, no problem, right? So, did 78 miles, Vail Pass. It rained the entire time going through Vail Pass, which was awful, right? We had like, Vail Pass, it's only 4 miles, but it's like straight up. And I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do, right? And I'm like, I cannot. And I see this kid pass me, and he has that This Is Personal shirt on, and I'm just like, nope, I cannot stop. I gotta keep going. So I kept going. I finished out Vail Pass, and I finished, and I've crossed the finish line, and I know it's just a tour. It's not a race. I'm not racing against anybody. And I know it's this tour, right? And I crossed the finish line, and I just burst into tears, and I'm just like, this is how I'm supposed to help. I'm gonna use my rides to raise awareness. The following weekend, I was tired, but I drove down to Winter Park, and I did Sunrise to Sunset. And Sunrise to Sunset was a relay, and you could have like a team to do as many miles as you can do in 12 hours. I didn't have a team. And there's this guy. I feel like I run into all these cool people when I ride, which is super neat. There's this guy, and we talked right before the race started, and he goes, where's your team? I said, I don't have a team. It's just me. And he goes, that's right, Ryder. Let's go. You got this. Keep going. And I was like, okay. So I get done with 1 lap. I wreck. And I was like, I'm just going to sit it out. I'm done. That guy passes me on the way down on his second, like he's on the way up for his second lap. And I'm coming down for my first. And he goes, all right, Ryder, let's go, 1 more lap. And I'm like, oh my gosh. All right, let's do it. Ibuprofen, put my knee pad on, ace wrap to my leg to keep it from swelling. And so I ace wrap my leg, and I put my knee pad on, and I keep it from swelling, right? And I go 1 more lap. I'm like, okay, after this lap, I'm done. I'm tired. I did 78 miles last week. Last Saturday, I did 50 miles the week before. I think 2 laps has been good. This is like an 8-9 mile lap. I'm like, it'll be fine. Hold on. So I do this lap. I come back down, and I will be damned if that guy wasn't coming up, and he was like, all right, Ryder, 1 more lap. And I'm like, son of a Mitch. All right, let's do it. If Raylan could ride a bike, I guarantee you he would ride a bike, because he loves his little tag along, and he asks for it all the time. So I was like, okay, 1 more lap. Well, that 1 more lap ended up being 5 laps, and I did close to 60 miles that day. And I got off my bike, and I drove home, because it's like a 3-hour drive. I drove home, and I was like, whew, that was rough, right? And I kept going, and I got home, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to move tomorrow. This is going to hurt so bad. Whew. And I got up, and I stretched, and I was like, let's do that again. So I get on Facebook. This is close to end-ish of the season. Mitch was like, no more back-to-back races. It's costing us a lot of money between hotels, because they were always like super far away. And I was like, okay, can I sign up for this one in November You're home. Can I sign up for this one in November? It's a 60-mile race. Just let me sign up for this one. And he was like, okay. So I signed up for the Austin Rattler. Then I realized that Austin Rattler is a qualifier for Leadville. And Leadville is like, anyways. So I learned it was a qualifier. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna train. I'm gonna work really hard. And I'm gonna hashtag ride for Raylan. It wasn't enough, right? So I get through my Austin Rattler. I didn't qualify for Leadville. And I was heartbroken, but I was like, my why was not strong enough to get me across that finish line to qualify in enough time. I did it, but I didn't podium, and it was not enough. So I was like, okay, here we go. So then I was like, I have to find something that's bigger than me, bigger than hashtag ride for Raylan, because it's not gonna be enough. Bigger than that, so I had to find something else, right? So I did just that, and that's why it's Ride for Raylan, Syngap.fun/Raylan. And then I signed up for the next race I could find, which was a 100-mile race in Utah in March. So I don't know, it could be snowy, it could be rainy, it could be sunshine. Have no idea. But it's 100 miles, Ride for Raylan, hashtag Ride for Raylan. So follow me. I think I'm actually gonna make a Facebook page, Ride for Raylan, Road to Leadville, or something, and see if we can't raise some funds, right? So thanks for hanging out with me today. I've got another hour here on the bike. I'm doing a 3-hour ride today. So another hour here on the bike. I'm gonna practice taking my nutrition, which is different on a stationary bike than it is on the trail, but I'm gonna do it anyways. I like these honey stingers. They're my favorite. So hashtag Ride for Raylan. Share it, like it. Let's raise some funds.